Hi guys, I want to show you a three-step method to write a great introduction that will apply to all IELTS essay types, but in this lecture we'll focus on the to what extent do you agree or disagree question type. Let's look at an example question. You'll notice that there are three sections to the question. Section 1, Section 2, and Section 3. Let's look at step 1. Step 1, rewrite section 1 in your own words. Let's look at section 1 again because we need to rewrite it in our own words. It says, the first car appeared on British roads in 1888. By the year 2020, there may be as many as 29 million vehicles on British roads. I rewrote this to say, the number of cars on British roads is continually increasing. What I have done is summarized section 1 into a single sentence. It's broad, but it captures the main idea. Step 2, rewrite section 2 in your own words. Let's look at section 2 of the question prompt. It says, alternative forms of transport should be encouraged and international laws introduced to control car ownership and use. Let's rewrite this section in our own words. Again, keep it broad, but make sure you're saying the same thing, not something different. Let's look at what I wrote. In addition to alternative transport modes being encouraged, global laws may be introduced to manage the number of vehicles on the roads. What I've written here says the exact same thing as section 2, but just in different words. You may notice that I have not yet given my opinion. All I've done is rewritten section 1 and 2 in my own words. My opinion comes next. Step 3. This essay will. Okay, now it's time to give your opinion. Section 3 asks you, to what extent do you agree or disagree? It's not just asking if you agree, it's asking to what extent or how much you agree. Let's see what I wrote. This essay will explain why encouraging alternative transport modes is imperative to reduce traffic numbers on British roads, but why global governance may not be the best means of achieving this outcome. So what I've done is told the reader that I think encouraging alternative transport modes is essential, but that international laws are not a great idea. That's my opinion. Let's look at each section side by side. Section 1. Section 2. Section 3. The full introduction looks like this. This is an excellent introduction because it is directly related to the question prompt and will allow us to build a logical, well-structured essay. You want to think about your introduction like an upside-down pyramid that starts broad and then focuses in. Rewrite section 1. Rewrite section 2, this essay will. Okay, before I give you some practice, let's take some questions from our E2 language users. Questions. Abdul from Saudi Arabia asks, when we rewrite a section in our own words, do we have to change every single word? Good question. The answer is no, because sometimes there is no alternative word that means the exact same thing. For example, I use the word encourage twice because there is no exact synonym for this word. Marco from Italy asks, do we need to know our opinion before we start writing the introduction? Great question. So, you can certainly write the first 2 sentences without an opinion, because you're just rewriting section 1 and section 2, but you definitely need to know your opinion by the third sentence. Hi guys, in this lecture we'll follow on from the introduction I showed you to write logical, well-structured paragraphs. I have a 4-sentence paragraph that I want to show you. But before we look at the paragraph, let's revisit our introduction, which said, the number of cars on British roads is continually increasing. In addition to alternative transport modes being encouraged, global laws may be introduced to manage the number of vehicles on the roads. This essay will explain why encouraging alternative transport modes is imperative to reduce traffic numbers on British roads, but why global governance may not be the best means of achieving this outcome. The third sentence of our introduction is the key to a great essay because it says what your paragraphs are going to be about. Look at the 2 ideas that are mentioned in the third sentence of our introduction. This essay will explain 1. Why encouraging alternative transport modes is imperative to reduce traffic numbers on British roads, but 2. Why global governance may not be the best means of achieving this outcome. So now we must write a paragraph about how encouraging alternative modes of transport is imperative, and another paragraph that says global laws to control car ownership are not the way to do this. Now you can see the connection between the introduction and your paragraphs. Let's look at how to write the paragraphs. Paragraph structure. Your paragraphs should have 4 parts. Not necessarily 4 sentences because you can expand each one if you need to, but definitely 4 parts. Opening, support, evidence, and closing. Let me show you a well-written paragraph with these 4 parts. We'll look at each part one by one. Our opening sentence says, alternative transport modes must be encouraged in order to reduce vehicle numbers. It follows on from our introduction and it introduces the paragraph. The rest of the information in the paragraph will flow from this opening sentence. Our support sentence adds information to our opening sentence. It says, public transport such as buses and trains are particularly important and people should be incentivized to use them. Now we need to add some evidence to strengthen our argument. Our evidence says, for example, local governments could subsidize the cost of public transport or even make it free so that people utilize it more frequently. Finally, we need to write a closing sentence that wraps up our paragraph and concludes it. It says, by encouraging the use of public transport, such as buses and trains, the number of vehicles on British roads would significantly decrease. If we put the 4 parts together, the paragraph says, alternative transport modes must be encouraged in order to reduce vehicle numbers. Public transport such as buses and trains are particularly important and people should be incentivized to use them. For example, local governments could subsidize the cost of public transport or even make it free so that people utilize it more frequently. By encouraging the use of public transport, such as buses and trains, the number of vehicles on British roads would significantly decrease. Keep in mind that this paragraph flows directly from sentence 3 of our introduction, which said, this essay will explain why encouraging alternative transport modes is imperative to reduce traffic numbers on British roads. Now, let's do the same thing for paragraph 2. The second idea in the third sentence of our introduction was, but global governance may not be the best means of achieving this outcome. In other words, reducing vehicle numbers. Practice. You try. Pause the video and try to write the paragraph using the 4 parts: opening, support, evidence, and closing. Think about why international laws won't work because every country is different. Okay, here's what I wrote. International legislation is not the way to control car numbers because each country is different. Laws need to take into consideration the local realities of individual countries. For example, car number control in Ghana will be very different to car control in the US because the two countries have very different economies and infrastructures. Therefore, national laws or even local laws, as opposed to international laws, would be much more effective at controlling vehicle numbers. So this paragraph uses the same four-part structure of opening, support, evidence, and closing, and it directly follows from the third sentence of our introduction. Questions? Right, let's take some questions from some E2 users. Fatima from the UAE asks, what if I can't think of any evidence? Good question. It's fine to make some statistics up, such as 77% of people are willing to use public transport. Or you can make up a recent study, such as a recent study from the University of Washington explains blah, blah, blah. You can even use your own experience and observations. You might compare your country with another country, just like I did. Make sure you watch the next lecture on how to write a conclusion. Hi guys, in this lecture we'll follow on from the introduction and follow on from the paragraphs. In this lecture I'll show you how to write a fantastic conclusion. So, in order to write our conclusion, we need to revisit our introduction, particularly that third sentence, and our paragraphs which followed on from the third sentence of the introduction. The introduction said, this essay will explain why encouraging alternative transport modes is imperative to reduce traffic numbers on British roads, but why global governance may not be the best means of achieving this outcome. We then took this third sentence and wrote our two paragraphs, one about encouraging alternative transport modes and one about how international laws won't work. To write the conclusion, we need to tell the reader what we told them. In fact, if you think about it, what we have done is this. In the introduction, you tell the reader what you will tell them. This essay will. In paragraph 1 and 2, you tell them. And in the conclusion, you tell the reader what you told them. Structure. The conclusion will have two sentences. The first sentence will retell the two main ideas briefly mentioned in your introduction and expanded in paragraph 1 and 2. And the second sentence of your conclusion will give your final opinion. Here's what I wrote. This essay discussed how alternative transport modes could be encouraged and the effectiveness of international legislation. In my opinion, encouraging alternative transport modes is essential. However, legislating at the local or national level would be much more effective because it would be more nuanced. Can you see the two parts? In the first part, we reminded the reader what the essay was about and summarized the main ideas from each paragraph. I then restated my opinion on the matter. Questions? We have a question here from Jaspreet from India. She asks, can I add more information in the conclusion? The answer is absolutely not. The conclusion should just repeat, in other words, what you briefly mentioned in your introduction and what you expanded upon in your paragraphs. e2language.com. Excellent, that's it. That's how you write a high-scoring essay. For more questions, one-on-one feedback and live classes, check out e2language.com.